Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, really is a great pleasure and a privilege to be part of this Athens Energy Forum. I am really very grateful to the organizers for inviting me and for organizing this. Really good stuff. I was just thinking, is it exactly 1 year since the last Athens Energy Forum? When I was listening to Amos Hochstein, I remember from the last year's proceedings that we had the pleasure of listening to Matthew Brycer. He was the former ambassador for US to Azerbaijan. And in this very forum 1 year ago, he offered the opinion that Nabucco West would be chosen over TAP. He also offered the opinion that the Azerbaijani government and the president were also in favor of Nabucco West. Now, 1 year after that, I have the pleasure of informing all of you that not only was Matthew Brycer wrong, but now TAP is chosen, but also every participant in this value chain from Baku to Europe, have now made their final investment decision, which means that they are now all committed in making sure that this supply chain to Europe is realized. It's not just plans and opinions being presented. This is now a real project. Now, I would like to be quite brief. I have only 3 messages, so I brought with me 3 illustrations to highlight those points, and 2 of them are quite well covered already, and that is about the big picture. Have a look at this supply chain from the Caspian Sea to Europe. It's huge. It's several projects just in Azerbaijan for drilling of all the production wells, putting in place all the production gear, bringing the well stream to shore and process it in the Sangashal terminal. Then the pipeline expansion from there up to the border with Turkey through Georgia. Then a dedicated new pipeline through Turkey. And then TAP at the end of it, starting at the border with Turkey and ending up in Italy. But from there also, Snam in Italy needs to expand their system so that this gas can reach consumers round about in Italy. And from there, you can also transport the gas further into the European markets. Where we are now is that, like I said, TAP was selected in June. Just before Christmas, Shaktanis made their final investment decision. And that comes on the back of everybody else in this supply chain having made their final investment decision. So TAP passed its such decision in November, and Shaktanis made theirs in December. Our plan going forward then is to award the final contract to construct towards the end of 2015, so that we can start constructing the major pipeline in 2016, late 15 or early 16. That means that through the year 15, we will be awarding contracts for all of this work. This is in order to be ready to receive gas in 2019, late 19 or early 2020. Shaktanis is the entity that finally dictates the startup date. Now, this is the bigger picture. And as you can see, TAP is just one part of it. But for this thing to work, every piece has to work. So TAP has a very important role to play as being the last leg of the supply chain. Now, what does this mean for Greece? This has also been touched upon by several speakers. Now, I think the importance for Greece is that Greece is about to kind of become the turning wheel for gas in this region. Somebody call it a hub. I like the word turning wheel. If you look at how Greece can be supplied with gas into Turkey, and how many opportunities TAP represents to actually then disperse gas out of Greece. That really makes you into a turning wheel. The numbers were mentioned earlier that in order to construct TAP, we would bring in 1.5 billion euros in foreign direct investments. The construction itself would need to be done by 2,000 workers, but the spin-off effect of that is 5 times as high, probably. Now, this is for phase 1. We have the capacity or the ability to double the capacity from 10 to 20 BCM, and we have the ability to reverse the flow so that gas can be backhauled from Italy and in here in the event of emergency, which again sort of makes another turn to this turning wheel. But, and this is my final and third point, it has to be built before we can realize all of these things. We have now completed what we call front-end engineering and design. We are doing the pre-qualification of every supplies of goods and services that we will need to make this going. These pre-qualifications have by no means been completed. We are in the process of having our environmental and social impact assessment application and study approved, which means that we are disclosing every minute detail of the pipeline and the project to the stakeholders involved. We, in this process, are really much concerned about knowing what the impact of the pipeline will have on the communities that we pass by. We tried to assess it in this report, but now we need to hear it from the horse's mouth how this actually affects people's livelihood and their business and their life. And that is a very educating process where we get lots of good feedback, lots of good proposals for how we can make adjustments. We've made 40 adjustments to reroute the pipeline already. I'm sure there will be more to come. But I'm also confident that we need to complete also that process so that we can have the final approval and get moving. The pipeline is passing through, our current calculation stands at 12,000 land plots. And we need to have agreement with every one of them. In addition, we need to have an agreement with those who actually use the land plots, not only those who own them, but those who are using them. And that process is ongoing, and also this needs to be completed before we can put the machinery on the ground. All in all, we are envisaging around about 15 huge contracts that TAP will sign, but these contractors will then need a lot of local support to do their work, so there will be a multitude of sub-suppliers and subcontractors to allow us. Then, as I said, we will start constructing late 15, early 16 in order to be ready in 19. So we are envisaging 3.5 years of construction. The only exception to this is actually that we, in your neighboring country, Albania, will start to construct earlier than this because there we need to construct roads and bridges to get access to the construction sites. This is what building a pipeline is about. We have moved away from all the competitions and all the plans and all the expression of points of view. Now we need to get on the ground and get the work going. And so I'm actually trying to make this point because we have had such fantastic support from the Greek government in getting this far. Absolutely wonderful. We would not have been able to do this without the support of the Greek government. But please keep that support coming because we are going to need it when we are going to do this work. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
No microphone, unfortunately, no microphone. All right, now we'll give the floor to Mr. Paleogiannis. Let's just make sure that we stick to time allocated to each and every one of us.
It's a real pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to address the 2014 Athens Energy Forum. I would like to share with you some views concerning the energy security in Southeastern Europe, as well as our efforts in DEPA and Greece to promote gas market integration in the region. Looking to the challenges that currently are around in the Europe, we realize that Europe as a major energy consumer faces a number of these challenges, mainly connected with its supply and demand equation, its energy security and sustainability, as well as a number of other issues related to gas market characteristics and vulnerabilities. And speaking for the latter, I would like to show this slide that give an idea what happens around the world in the regional markets. The red line is the European prices. The green line are the Asian prices, and the blue line is the United States prices. As you can see, prices in Europe are by far higher than the United States ones, and that creates a real problem in the competitiveness of the European economy. On the other hand, while the internal gas market is functioning quite well in the northern west, at least in northern west Europe, and prices has converged, oil-linked prices and hub prices. These high-level prices, persisting for some years now, lend to a lower competitiveness of gas against other fuels. And that creates also problems for gas, which is losing market share, and it is estimated that the last 2 years, 60 BCM of gas has removed from the power generation sector. Nevertheless, Europe, due to decline in indigenous production, will need about 60 to 80 BCMs by 2025, and that creates a challenge how to secure these quantities. Coming to Balkans and to Southeastern Europe, the challenges are very similar, even more complicated. High dependence on Russian gas, declining indigenous production, and insufficient interconnections, LNG facilities, and underground storages. And answer to the question of Mr. Ipofandis, what happens in 2009, I would say that just the shortages in 15 days was just 1 day difference between a normal day in Europe and a winter day, a wild winter. This is what we have to do and what we have to cover in the years to come. Not very much, but important. And that's why TAP and IGB are extremely important. We estimate that differential demand in Southeastern Europe may reach 15 BCM, out of which 1.5 to 2 BCM will come from Greece. But look at this slide. Everywhere in Europe there are hubs, with one exemption in Southeastern Europe. This is a very serious vulnerability, and that mainly impacted the consumers. But where the consumers are impacted, there is an opportunity for suppliers. And that's why Southeastern Europe is an important area, a growing, but very close to a number of gas-producing countries, and that's why a number of gas producers are looking at. I'm coming now what DEPA has done and is doing in order to ensure that there will be enough supplies in our region and of course in Greece, and how the market will be a competitive one in order to utilize these opportunities as a commercial company. That is our vision, developed for more than a decade now. We want to create a new gas entrance for Southeastern Europe and establish Greece as a physical and pricing hub in the region. And that was a strategy developed some years ago, in late 90s, when Greece adopted a threefold strategy to diversify its gas supply sources, to establish Greece as a transiting country, gas transiting country, and to participate actively in the creation of a competitive market in the region. And that was also the idea of the Southern Corridor idea. Why the Southern Corridor idea? Simply because while the most of electricity are mainly produced within the European Union, gas is producing outside Europe and has to be transported to Europe. That was the necessity that led to the South Corridor idea. And just to have an idea what means, Jatil mentioned that, but look at the figures, it's a mega project. Decades of billions of dollars needed the gas, the molecular of gas from the Sac-Denis field to come to Europe. Probably a little bit different, but we are in the beginning, not at the end, Jadil. Jadil explained the importance of TAP. I would like just to mention that its strategic importance became more obvious nowadays during the Ukrainian crisis. I would like to make a small reference to the IGB pipeline and to make a little bit obvious its importance. Look what happens in our region. IGB will connect Greece, TAP, for example, with the Bulgarian system, and through other interconnection of local nature, the connection between Bulgaria and Romania, Bulgaria and Serbia, etc., and furthermore to Ukrainian and to Moldova or to Hungary, wouldn't allow gas flows from the Caspian region or the Middle East to reach the entire region. And in conjunction with the Aegean LNG or Rebithusa, would provide also LNG to the area. That is very, very important. It was one of the measures promoted by the European Union after the crisis in 2009. Mr. I'm right. This is the status and the importance of the IGB project. We are progressing very well with our Bulgarian colleagues and partners, and as you know, Edison is participating in this project. We are monitoring now some and promoting some actions in order by next September or October to receive the final investment decision. And by doing that, we wouldn't expect this pipeline to be operational by the end of 2016. The Aegean LNG, it's another initiative of DEPA in our strategic agenda. It's very, very important. It would be an FSRU. We have made some feasibility studies, and we are now carrying out an environmental impact assessment, and it is to be completed in the next month. It would have a capacity of about maximum 5 BCM, and it could be done and could be operational also by 2016. But we have something to do before that. We must find some partners in that. DEPA is not will not control in total this project, but as we have already discussed by our Bulgarian friends, our Romanian friends, it would be a multinational cooperation here. And some conclusion. The main of that is that Greece, by virtue of its position, is well prepared and thus able not only to transit significant gas quantities from the Caspian Sea, Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean through the TAP, ITGI and the East Med pipeline mentioned before by the Minister, but also to provide gas from other sources through the plant IG and LNG and the IGB. Thank you very much for your attention.
Let us thank Mr. Paleogiannis, and now let's give the floor to DESFA. Mr. Natsikas is up next.
Κυρίες και κύριοι, εκλεκτοί προσκεκλημένοι,
Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, representatives of foreign countries, of companies and corporate entities, let me for my part thank the organizing committee, the International New York Times, Καθημερινή, Sky, for inviting me and for providing us all with an opportunity to communicate, discuss, exchange ideas and talk about our experiences and also share our concerns. The subject matter I'm going to tackle is actually the role of DESFA within the integrated European natural gas market. The title of this forum has a subtitle, The Road Towards a New Energy Map. Indeed, here we are, faced with major changes in the map, the energy map of not just Europe, but also Southeastern Europe.
Από χρόνο σε χρόνο.
Each and every year, we can't help but notice noticeable changes in the routes, in the pipelines, and needs there are in Europe. And I can give you an example for you to grasp changes. DESFA, DEPA back then, because you know DESFA came in 2007. We were part and parcel of our parent company DEPA. DESFA, or DEPA back then, first provided natural gas in 1996, so it's been less than 20 years. And in the meantime, here we are, we have a high-pressure grid for storage and transportation, and this is quite mature in less than 20 years' time. Moreover, we have a very promising future ahead of us. I would like to show you my presentation. Slide 3, please. So here we are, DESFA. Allow me to switch to English. Originally, I was asked to deliver the speech in English, so I'm switching to that. I've also prepared a presentation.
In 2007, by an effective unbundling of transmission and storage activities from DEPA SA, which was the public company that introduced gas in Greece in 1996. Greece was at that time one of the last European countries to introduce natural gas in its energy balance. However, in the last 10 to 15 years, the evolution of the European gas market scene made DESFA a significant player and gave it a pivotal role for the import of gas into European Union, which is an expression, it's a phrase of the Commission. In this presentation, I will try to review some of the factors that contributed to the transformation and the evolution of DESFA. European Union adopted in 2009 the Directive 2009/73, aiming to ensure the functioning of the energy market and energy supply, to promote energy efficiency and interconnection of energy networks, to improve the legislative framework and increase the transparency in the market, enhance market integration, improve the access to end users, facilitate third-party access to key infrastructures, improve the security of supply, and achieve higher standards of service. The implementation of this policy included further to the directive, regulations, and finally network codes, which establish common rules in the energy transmission sector. In accordance with the Regulation 715 of 2009, the network codes are drafted by ENCHOG, which is the European Network of Transmission System Operators, following guidelines set by ACER, the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, and approved by the Commission through the comitology procedure. Next slide. DESFA has an active role and participation in all levels of ENCHOG in Brussels. Participates in the General Assembly, participates in the Management Board and all working groups, and contributes to the drafting of the network codes for gas in Europe. The experience gained from this activity enables DESFA to play a creative role in the adaptation of these codes to rules applied in the local market. DESFA is also coordinating transmission system operators from 9 countries in the region in drafting the 10-year Southern Corridor Gas Regional Investment Plan. Next slide, please. This contact with the European partners has provided the possibility to DESFA to understand and face the changes in the international gas market scheme. In the recent years, such changes in the European gas market, but also in the global gas market, are the closing of nuclear plants in Japan and some other countries like Germany, the revolution of shale gas in the United States, which increased the coal exports to the European Union, affecting the energy mix for power production in Europe, the penetration of renewables, which was a European policy for the protection of the environment, the economic crisis since 2008, which resulted to a reduction of the gas demand forecast all over Europe, the increase of LNG prices in the Far East, combined with the renegotiation of contract prices between several European importers and Gazprom, that influenced the competition between pipe gas and LNG in the last 2 years. Another change which is taking place, the slowly emerging new uses of gas as road and marine fuel. The disruption of gas supplies through Ukraine in 2009, which increased the interest and the efforts for the construction of new routes and established new counterparts. In 2010, the strategy Europe 2020 was launched, which put energy infrastructures at the forefront and underlined the need to upgrade and interconnect Europe's networks. Next slide. This experience contributed to the adoption of Regulation 347 of 2013 and the expansion, upgrade, and interconnection of European Union energy infrastructure. Following the provisions of this regulation, a list of 131 projects of common interest, PCIs, or clusters of projects was finally adopted in December 2013. Projects of common interest must contribute to the market integration, the security of supply, the competition, the sustainability. Projects of common interest must allow and provide cross-border flow of gas. These projects of common interest benefit from priority status within their national legislation, a reduced permit granting period, which is more or less 3 or 3.5 years. And possible financial aid for projects that face higher risks, than those incurred by a comparable infrastructure project. Τελειώνοντας,
On a final note, allow me to say this. DESFA, i.e. the national administrator of the system, has made great progress in less than 20 years, in the sense that DESFA managed to become a significant player within the wider region of Southeastern Europe and the Balkans. We are at a crossroads that brings together the various routes, corridors, and networks for energy in general and natural gas in particular. And so the discovery of new reserves and fields in the wider region will enhance further this role for DESFA. And the privatization of DESFA, which started back in 2012, and significant steps were made throughout the year 2013. The agreement was actually signed in December 2013. And thus, once DESFA becomes a member of the SOCAR group of companies, because SOCAR, for its turn, is a very important player in the field of oil and natural gas. Thus, DESFA eventually will make even greater steps in the future with a view to guaranteeing and ensuring natural gas flow and relevant supplies for the sake of not just Greece, but the region overall. Thank you very much, Mr. Natsikas. From natural gas, let's take a break, in the sense that now we can deal with oil instead. Mr. John Baldwin, BP Vice President, Communications and External Affairs, has the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Καλησπέρα σας, κυρίες και κύριοι.
The pleasures of speaking towards the end of the day is that actually virtually everything I had in mind to say has been said. So I'll keep my talk very, very short. But it does give me an opportunity perhaps to underlie from BP's perspective what the really, really important points are in this Southern Corridor activity. First of all, it would be remiss of me not to start with a big thank you, particularly to the government of Azerbaijan and SOCAR, who have been drivers, I think, of the process of commercializing Shah Deniz gas, and in particular their desire to see some of that gas going to Europe. Equally, there's a big thank you to the Greek government, who've done so much actually to make TAP a reality, as we've heard earlier. The second point I'd like to make is, I don't know how you feel in the audience, but there's been a lot of people talking about the Southern Corridor today, and I think what's remarkable is how consistent the story is from everyone. In a project as large as this one, I think that's actually quite extraordinary, that an awful lot of people are saying the same things, which is the decision by Azerbaijan to see diversification of its buyers, the decision by Europe to see a diversification of supply to Europe, and the need for that diversification of supply, in particular because of declining indigenous production in Europe, and also the need for security and diversity of supply. But of course, all that's very well. But speaking for a company like BP, who has shareholders, they actually like us to make money as well. So not only do we need a strategic project, but we also need a project that actually provides an adequate return to the shareholders. 45 billion in anybody's terms is quite a lot of money. And it's worth asking, well, what are the sources of money? And I think this comes back to one of my themes. Whilst it's terribly important to have strategic clarity, which we have, it's terribly important to have political support, which we have, but it's also important to have a project that actually makes some money for the investors, because that 45 billion has got to be paid for. What's interesting about Chardonnay and Chardonnay 2 is actually this is rather a unique opportunity. We saw earlier on the difference in gas prices in the US, in Europe, and indeed in the Far East. And of course, part of the reason for those big differences in price is that gas is pretty expensive to transport over long distances. I think this is correct, but somebody once said to me that in order to transport a molecule, a thermal equivalent of gas from Norway to the UK, you can actually send the same amount of oil twice around the planet. It's because oil, of course, is energy dense and gas is not, and so therefore it's relatively, per unit of energy, cheaper to transport, a lot cheaper to transport oil rather than gas, which is why we see the big differences in the gas prices between the markets. Nevertheless, you begin to see convergence within those markets as you build infrastructure, and of course as people get innovative about looking at ways of reducing the cost of gas transportation. So it is quite a challenge to put in major piece of infrastructure, and you heard already today how much infrastructure needs to be put in here. It's drilling in the offshore, it's the platforms to process the gas, it's the terminal to process it onshore Azerbaijan, it's expansion of the pipeline from Azerbaijan through Georgia, the SCPX pipeline, it's the pipeline across Turkey, the TANAP pipeline, and of course the TAP pipeline that goes through Albania, Greece to Italy. One source of money is, of course, the European buyers. We've sold 10 BCMA of gas in Europe, 8 in Italy, 1 here in Greece, and 1 to Bulgaria. Those projects, those gas agreements were announced last September, and the total aggregate value of those gas contracts is around about $100 billion US. 6 BCMA has been sold to Turkey, making the 16 BCMA in total for Chardonnay 2. And also, Chardonnay 2 is a gas condensate field. And so not only does that field produce gas, it also produces condensate, which is the light form of oil, and that will be put into the BTC pipeline, another major source of revenue for the project. That all enabled us on the 17th of December to take, along with all the partners in this project, the final investment decision, and you've already heard how both TAP and TANAP in advance of that had taken their resolutions to construct, and that decision effectively fired the gun on actually getting really serious about this project. And because the upstream needs to be put in place in advance of the pipeline projects, we've already started announcing the award of major contracts in Azerbaijan to contractors. So the show is very definitely on the road. Now, my colleague from TAP here, of course, then said, well, and now it's down to really detailed work in terms of executing the project in a smart way, which takes into account the concerns of the communities and the local authorities and the regional authorities in the area where this pipeline passes, because, of course, their concerns are not necessarily the same as our concerns, and they need to be, their concerns need to be taken into account. And I'm glad to see that actually TAP is working to do this, supported by the shareholders in TAP. So hopefully, if all this works without let or hindrance, as they say, we should be seeing gas into Turkey and then into Europe towards the end of this decade, which I think will be a great success story for us all. Thank you very much indeed.
Να τον ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Ευχαριστούμε τον κύριο Baldwin και ακολουθεί και ο Κανελόπουλος.
Let us thank Mr. Baldwin. Mr. Kanellopoulos, you're up next. 5 minutes should suffice, no?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was kindly asked to keep my presentation as short as possible, so I will try to shorten my presentation. Let me share with you, from the marketer's standpoint of view, what can I have my presentation as well? Yep. Okay. Let me share with you from the standpoint of a marketer in the Greek and national market what the major development of this big project, I'm talking about TAP, what will be the consequences, and I will try to address certain questions. How can TAP contribute to the Southeastern Europe gas markets integration? First of all, it will contribute to the security supply. The previous speakers told about that, so I don't want to expand even more on this. Competitiveness and sustainability. But let me touch a little bit the Greek case. Greece has three main gates. It's from the northern borders. We're talking about Russian gas. Last year represented approximately 64% of our gas supply portfolio. The Turkish gas, it's approximately 20%, while the rest is LNG from Revithoussa. So in a case like the one that we live right now, that there is a potential disruption of supply from the northern borders, then the 64% will be directly affected, while the rest, 20% coming from Turkey, will affect it indirectly. In total, the 84% of our gas supplies can be missed, and it's a serious situation. So TAP will add up the security supply, and we can understand why. And I think that TAP is adding up in the puzzle by covering one of the missing links. Next question is how TAP is related to the ongoing liberalization of the Greek gas market. We have to consider TAP not in isolation, but in conjunction with all the other projects. About the interconnections, we discussed before about IGB, there is the Ionian Adriatic pipeline, there is the upgrade of Revithoussa terminal, and we can see TAP as an enabler. TAP can contribute to the liberalization of the Greek market, but can achieve also the opposite effect. And just to be specific, it was mentioned before that DEPA has already secured 1 BCM from TAP. So if DEPA will bring this 1 BCM and holding its current super dominant position, it is something that goes without saying that the market will close. However, there is the other side of the coin, that TAP can bring more gas supplies, and if all the market participants align towards the open up and the liberalization of the market, can be of benefit to the Greek market and to the Greek end consumers. And for achieving that, we need to have, apart from the infrastructure projects like TAP, other interventions in the market. I'm talking about regulatory interventions, legislative regulations. And I think that if there is the willingness to open up the market, there are other examples in Europe, like in Turkey with Botas. They successfully made a gas release program. They have already given 16 BCM of natural gas to other than Botas market players. There are examples in Belgium with District Gas or with E.ON at Gaz de France. And I think that TAP can be an enabler, can bring a new source of supply, and this can add up in the liberalization of the Greek market and bringing the prices down, which already is getting us to our next, and as marketer, the most critical element of our discussion, that of what are the benefits and how can the Greek market capture these benefits. Of course, it's obvious that we're talking about a new source of supply. Can this new source of supply on a standalone basis can bring benefits? Okay, in a certain extent, yes, but we need other things as well to reap the full-scale benefits of TAP. First of all, we need to think innovative and creative. We need to create a trading environment, a gas hub or an exchange. And again, we need to work both in the legislative and regulatory framework. We have to create a liquid market, and by having a super dominant player, by any means, there is no any liquid market. So in order to have a gas exchange at the gas hub, we need to have liquidity. And this can be done only by bringing new players. In order to have new players in the market, we have to release volumes and everybody to participate. Of course, the TAP can widen the scope of the marketers like ourselves, that we can have access to other countries in the region. It was mentioned also before, and of course can create a competitive environment that inevitably will lead the costs down. Though in order for all this to materialize, it is essential that there is a clear commitment from all stakeholders, each one on each area, like policymakers in European Union level and local level, regulatory, again, European Union and local level, infrastructure like TAP, suppliers, gas suppliers, marketers like ourselves, and of course the customers. From our side, as a marketer, part of two of the largest Greek companies, both very active in the energy sector, who have a long-term view on the Greek and wider regional market, and who are committed to continue on our path being pioneers on all stages of the Greek natural gas market. Thank you.
Let us thank Mr. Kanellopoulos. Now, before we give the floor to Mr. Korani, unfortunately, Mr. Natsikas will have to go, so maybe if we have any questions, let's have them now. Questions for Mr. Natsikas. Microphone, please. A question to Mr. Natsikas exclusively, right?
Με το μικρόφωνο στον κύριο, σηκώστε το χέρι σας να σας δει. Ωραία. Κύριε Νάτσικα.
So, Mr. Natsikas, look into the DESO financials. They really...
Αν δεν σας πειράζει στα ελληνικά.
Να την κάνω στα ελληνικά. Ωραία.
Looking at the financial statistics of DESFA, and I know you had an official presentation made last year and this year as well. So your finances are okay. Your investment project in Revithousa actually happened because you had scope for that. You also have self-financed a great part of that project. You have the know-how, you have innovation in your hands and respective tools. Me, being Greek, I'm satisfied with the image of this public entity. I'm happy at least as regards its own business potential or operational goals. Mr. Venizelos earlier on said during his opening keynote address that the public sector is playing a role and the private entities are complementing that role in the sense that the institutional framework is put by the public sector and technology and innovation is being offered by the private sector. And so you have a partnership. What I fail to grasp is this. Why do you think that the privatization of DESFA and by a state-owned company like SOCAR for that matter will eventually help DESFA grow further? Why do you think this will happen and where do you base this expectation of yours? I mean, what sort of outcomes do you expect? Just like you said in the beginning of your statement or question, the level of know-how, expertise of DESFA, but also our human resources are quite excellent. And I also believe that we cater to the needs and still do at a high level, systematically. Moreover, our finances and economics are good, and they were last year, they're still so this year. The privatization process was promoted through an international bid, which was open to everyone, and so eventually the contract for TAP was signed, and this offers scope to DESFA, scope to work together with a company which is really active in the energy sector. It's active and knowledgeable as concerns oil oil and natural gas. It's also a company which is expanding and creating and constructing new infrastructure in its own country, Baku, Athens too, all the way to Italy. So this is a company which is modern, it's technologically advanced, it has its own capacity in human resources, and this is the case of SOCAR. I think that DESFA, for its part, needs to open up, and there is scope for such extroversion because we have various projects which are underway. We have TAP, which got to the point of the FID, and there are more investment projects which are being planned right now and others which are materializing in Greece. So you see, there is need for funding, and funds will be there. So given our economics and financial situation, there will be no funding problem whatsoever, because we are being supported by a company which I'm well aware of. I've been to Baku time and again, and this is a huge company, a great company, and it's really active in this field. They are knowledgeable. So there's everything for us as DESFA to win, and this will also be profitable for Greece overall. Thank you. More questions, brief questions, please, to Mr. Natsikas. Then let's have a thank you, Mr. Natsikas.
Mr. David Korani, the floor is yours. Deputy Director from Dinu Patriciu Eurasia Center, Atlantic Council.
Just to save some time, I'm going to remain seated if you don't mind. I'm sort of the odd man out on this panel because I don't come from a business background. I'm from a think tank based in Washington, D.C., a think tank that deals with energy geopolitics, among many other subjects. So let me address the issue from that point of view, from that context, especially in view of the Ukraine crisis. But before I do that, let me just come back to Kjetil's remarks in the beginning, and then I have to do that because Matt Bryza is a dear friend and colleague of mine. So I'm just going to say this, that he usually gets it very right, but when he gets it wrong, he gets it very wrong. So this time he was wrong, that's true. Let me just put essentially one issue on the table, and that issue is how Europe will react to Russia's latest actions in Ukraine, and how in light of developments with regard to Ukraine, Europe's policy in the context of energy supply diversification might change. In my reading, there are already strong indications that this time it may be different. And after this crisis, it won't be business as usual as it was eventually after 2006 and 2009. And to the extent the Ukraine crisis will escalate, I could imagine a scenario where Europe is this time will be a bit more serious about making the Southern Gas Corridor, among other things, strategic in the sense that it's going to be a strategic alternative supply route, and could consider speeding up the turning of the Southern Gas Corridor into a genuinely strategic gas corridor. What do I mean by that? I mean that beyond the initial 10 BCM, we have discussed that on several occasions today, that there are additional quantities that might come online from Azerbaijan, that might come online from Iraq at some point, that might come online from Iran even, if the geopolitical context allows that. The question in my mind is, can we facilitate that process by revisiting the idea of making TANAP a strategic project instead of a commercial project? And the key question to that, in my mind, is actually EU funding. Is it something that the political leaders are willing to consider? So to facilitate TANAP being built with the larger capacity and to actually fund that, so the surplus costs, that is something that could be a political decision, and that could fast-track TANAP and increase the capacity of TANAP. It's more a question than an answer, but I think at some point this debate might come. And I hereby join the John Baldwin movement of short presentations.
Thank you very much. Maybe Mr. Tankland? Yes, okay, shortly. Mr. Tankland, maybe you can also position yourself concerning the strategic aspect instead of the pure commercial of TAP, as mentioned. And your comment is over.
Well, I think it is not so easy to blame Gazprom for everything. Gazprom is our main supplier, and I have to say that last December we have an interruption from Turkey. Turkey bought us. So Gazprom was the one increasing the quantities over and above the daily quantity we received through the contract without paying a single penny for that, just the commodity, and that is true. And Gazprom is a reliable supplier of gas to Europe. On the other hand, we, as European, as buyers, we soon diversify our supply sources in order to avoid any crisis, either in Ukraine or whatever it will be. This is my comment purely from commercial point of view.
Mr. Tolle.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting question. Can we turn the supply chain through Turkey, perhaps even TAP, from being commercial into being strategic? And who is going then to pay the difference? And how can we make up for that difference? I think I would like to repeat one of the arguments we used when we discussed this earlier, that the importance of the Southern Gas Corridor is probably not the size of the first step, but to make the first step. I think if we can demonstrate that this can be done technically safe and commercially sound, that creates a dynamism in itself. And so I would now concentrate on, as of course I have a job to do for the first step, but let's see if we can make this work. And then see what kind of dynamism that creates. We heard from the SOCA representative how many opportunities there are just inside Azerbaijan. And we've also seen how much interest now has been generated from the north of Iraq. I'm sure there will be gas for more than TAP. And I'm sure that if we can make this successfully, there will be more pipelines going in parallel.
That's why we keep ITGI alive.
Well, I was just going to respond to the strategic point. Having strategic projects without somebody paying the money, of course, is a bit of a problem. And I'm actually with the idea that says the most important thing here is to actually get this project done. The history of infrastructural projects tends to be that once you get something in place, things then follow. All that said, of course, it takes time for that to happen. But all I would say is be wary of the scenario where you start out by being too ambitious and too complicated, and then nothing happens. And I would argue that the Southern Corridor actually is successful because we've been careful to ensure that we do have a long-term ambition insofar as the pipeline is expandable, but at the same time we've tried to make sure that the initial steps are financeable and commercial. Thanks.
Κύριε Κανελόπουλε, εσείς.
There is the political aspect and there is a commercial aspect. Always in the commercial aspect, you can see opportunities and you can act very quickly, just grasp the opportunity. And if we take the current crisis, the commercial aspects that everybody wants this issue to be resolved and not even a single hour any European country to remain without natural gas. And of course, the same thing you can see from the political aspect as well. But the political aspect, there are other issues. You can see that there is Russia, and can we as European afford having that. What we have to do in order to avoid such things to happen again. And then comes what John said before about the money, who is going to pay the bill. And we have to do projects in order to enhance our security supply. And this cannot be done overnight. We have to invest and we have to do very careful steps and we have to plan carefully. You take the example of TAP. TAP started so many years ago and now we are in the phase of starting the construction. So we are talking about long-term projects and long-term commitments. And by saying all these things, I think that we have to find in a way that we're going to satisfy our commercial needs, and on the same, at the same time, to think strategically, looking at the end and what the picture of Europe in terms of energy supply and energy security, supply security, we want to have.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. We will continue with the next topic. Are we witnessing the emergence of the new energy corridor? This is the question. You will have all the answers. May I ask to join us Dr. Saleh Jalad, Chairman, Middle East Economic Survey and Senior Vice President for Banking CCC Group. We will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here.
Σας ευχαριστούμε λοιπόν. Ακολουθεί η επόμενη.